Alors, bonjour à tous et bienvenue. Merci de nous avoir rejoints pour cette conférence en collaboration avec l'Aga Khan Museum et l'Alliance Française de Toronto. Je suis Laetitia Delemare et je suis la directrice culturelle. Dans le cadre du mois de la poésie, l'Alliance française et l'Aga Khan Museum s'associent pour vous proposer une rencontre entre deux poétesses et autrices, Tawhida Tanya Evanson et Afua Cooper. Cette rencontre sera modérée par Amirali Alibhai, responsable des arts à l'Aga Khan Museum. Ne vous inquiétez pas, so don't worry, so we are going to switch in English in a few minutes. Je voudrais vous rappeler que cette conférence sera en anglais, so this talk is going to be in English, but with an interpretation in French. Donc il y aura une interprète, Violaine Tourny, qui nous fera l'honneur de faire l'interprétation aujourd'hui. Si vous souhaitez voir donc cette conférence et entendre en français, vous avez simplement à aller dans le bouton du bas Interprétation et mettre en français et vous pourrez entendre en français ce que disent nos invités. Alors, avant de commencer, je tenais aussi à souligner que les terres sur lesquelles nous sommes rassemblés font partie des terres ancestrales des Premières Nations. Cette région fait partie du territoire traditionnel des Wendat, des Anishinabés, des Haudenosaunee, des Mississaugas de la rivière Crédit et de la nation Métis. Avant de commencer, je voudrais aussi remercier nos partenaires, la Banque de Montréal, Patrimoine canadien, l'ambassade de France au Canada et évidemment l'Aga Khan Museum avec qui nous présentons cette conférence. Je voudrais aussi vous rappeler que cette conférence est enregistrée et qu'elle sera disponible dans les prochains jours sur les réseaux sociaux de l'Aga Khan Museum. Donc, sans plus attendre, so without further ado, I will give the floor to Amirali from Aga Khan Museum. Amir, c'est à toi.
Bonjour, merci, Laetitia. And welcome to everybody. I'm really happy to be here today. And I want to thank the Alliance and Laetitia and her team for working really well together with the team at the Aga Khan Museum to make this happen. And of course, to both Tawhida and Afua for agreeing to meet together in this month in Canada, which is celebrated as National Poetry Month. And, you know, these times, this context, this global pandemic, the shutdown, the questioning of so many things in our societies around the world is kind of like the backdrop for this. And one of the things that throughout my life has been really important, and I think for many of us, is, you know, I turn to poets, I turn to writers, I turn to artists. When I say poetry, I think of art writ large, poetry writ large, and it includes so many different ways in which human beings express themselves. I'm really happy to be joined by Tawhida Tanya Evanson and Afua Cooper, two women who are recognized poets. Afua is a celebrated and highly esteemed poet who has been the poet laureate for the region of Halifax, is a professor at Dalhousie University, is an award-winning dub poet, spoken word artist, and is working across departments, which is something I think is really exciting in her work at Dalhousie as well. And I think of Afua also as an activist, someone who is making change in the world through her work, through her art, through her work also as a historian. And also Tawhida Tanya Evanson, who is an award-winning poet. She has written, she's the author of 2 books of poetry, and just has published her first novel, and it's been quite successful, Book of Wings, and I'm hoping that we hear a little bit about that as well. She's also a performer, a program director, a producer, and you know, I think that both these artists are places where I have had the opportunity to look for truth, truth through poetry. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to welcome both of you, and I hope you didn't mind my off-the-cuff introduction. I wasn't reading, and I wanted to invite you because we spoke about this yesterday, and I think the only framework we had for today to each say a few words, and then, each one of you is going to, I believe, read a piece that you've selected for our gathering today. Afua, welcome.
Thank you, Ali. Thanks for such a wonderful introduction, and thanks to Letitia and her team, and thanks to Tawhida for inviting me to this conversation, and to everyone who is tuning in our virtual space. Thank you. Merci beaucoup et bienvenue. I am going to read a poem it's called A World Greener Than Eden. And I wrote it during the pandemic, so maybe a year ago. And it's from my new book called Black Matters, it's a collaboration between myself and a photographer and a literary scholar by the name of Wilfried Rossert from Germany. So the poem, we all became, during the pandemic, when everything broke, started foraging for food and hunting for food. There were these long lines at the supermarket, and it really shows how vulnerable we are, especially people who live in urban places where you don't have a backyard or something with fruits and vegetables. And also, a lot of food is grown in Canada, but it's exported. So I, live in Nova Scotia, where there's a place called the Annapolis Valley, which is kind of like the breadbasket of the province, but so much of what's produced there is exported. So I started to think a lot about food, going to different supermarkets, joining the line, joining a farmers cooperative where farmers from the country brought fruits and vegetables and grains to the city, and you line up when they come in, they park at the parking lot. And so it made me think of my own childhood growing up in Jamaica, and how my parents grew food, my dad and my grandfathers. My dad was a mechanic by trade, but at the same time, he grew food. That was his hobby. He wanted to be an agronomist, but he ended up with 9 children, so he didn't go to agronomy college. He trained as a mechanic, but fortunately, he was gifted with land from his own father. And my mother also was gifted with land from her own father. And these 2 grandfathers, before we were born, also planted up the place. So the poem is called A World Greener Than Eden. My father planted a provision ground with yams of all sorts, yellow, white, Negro, Afu, Lucy, even Yampi, and sweet potatoes with red skin, golden skin, white skin, and pumpkins, squash, dasheen, bado, cocoa, cassava, cucumbers, and other root and vine crops, gungu peas, okras, plantains, and bananas. He planted breadfruit and ackee trees, and like the agronomist he was, crafted a tree that bore June plum, avocado, and jackfruit at the same time. For the short term, Dad planted a callaloo patch with bok choy, spinach, bell peppers, bird peppers, scotch bonnet, carrots, garlic, onions, scallion. My father always praised the soil. Decades before, my grandfather planted citrus groves with sweet orange, civil orange, tangerine, lime, and the startling lemon. and grapefruit trees that every season bore so much that neighbors, friends, and passers-by invited themselves into our yard to partake. Grandfather also planted coconut trees, made his own oil and milk from the coconut flesh, grew sugarcane, had his own mill that pressed the juice from the cane, made wet sugar and molasses. He tended a cocoa walk from which he prepared chocolate to make chocolate tea, which he sweetened with wet sugar and flavored with coconut milk, nutmeg, and cinnamon powder for us. Grandfather also planted corn. These men built a well with a spout pointing in each of the 4 directions that carried water to irrigate the crops they planted. The end.
Wow, I really want to be there. That sounds like Eden, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Tawhida?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this event. It's an honor. Thank you to Amirali, to Afua for accepting the invitation to join me, to Letitia and her team. It's funny, Afua, you read a piece about food, and I also chose a piece about food. It's called Cooked. So you gave me the ingredients, and now we're going to put it in the pot. So this is from Book of Wings, which is it's a novel. It's a work of fiction, but it's written by a poet. So everything in it is poetry, you know. Cooked. In the name of Paris in the springtime, in the name of the tears shed by the prophets of God, what do I do now that I have left my lover for a room with a view? I'm alone in this Paris hotel, drunk and waiting. Dervish, where's your ark of return? Where's the source of my flavor, the source of that which enriches? I remember the day when you first appeared to me in the tavern, all smooth and working a mean conga, slim and dangerous, a grazing of your fingers on my right arm, and the cooking began. You scooped me up in rituals I hadn't known before, fed me meals of such divinity, and I'm known for my gluttony. The divorce made me ugly. It increased my waist size, created arms that did nothing above my head, served only to lift bread and chocolate and liquor to lips, bread and chocolate and liquor to lips. I tried hard not to be at the mercy of fragments, food, or yesterday's mental actions, but in the name of Paris in the springtime, in the name of the tears shed by the prophets of God. What do I do now that I'm a solitary traveler, and a poor one at that, hiding under a crust of cautionary sense, a woman in the possible violence of night in new countries? Even old churches here sport gargoyles projected from above to watch over you, but I got no one to watch my back but my own tattoo. I'm a pilgrim in new landscapes. Travel is a good ritual, like prayer. They are both examples designed to calm the body, focus the heart. Rituals are reminders, our movement from gross to subtle. Inshallah, we find the most beautiful ones. But in the name of Paris in the springtime, in the name of the tears shed by the prophets of God, what do I do now? I will carry myself up from the ocean floor because I got me energy since you closed the door. I will leave the city at full moon, leave the mistrals, the columns of dog droppings on winding streets, gargoyles at every head thrown back. Gargoyles ain't all that. They are lost lovers jutting from memory with jaws open, ready to get fat. Keep the memory solid. Use as a tool to remove garbage from the straight path. Let the gargoyles keep their watch in all their uniqueness and wrath. This magic is real. It comes from my heart. It fills out my hands. It stirs the spoon in the pot, the pencil on the page. It prevents the rot, burns the lead away. This burning is real. There's no end to it. And this burning eventually becomes sweet. But in the name of Paris in the springtime, in the name of the tears shed by the prophets of God, I go round and round and round and round in this pot you threw me in, and I thought I could swim. Now you're no longer the chef, and I look up to see who's stirring me, and it's the hand of God working the spoon of me. I see now this is the meal of me that I offer as alms. The more I get cooked, the tastier I become. And so I let myself be seized. None of this can be undone. I submit myself to true love so that the meal of me can belong to everyone. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Tawhida. Thank you, Afua, as well. And I think this serendipitous choosing of food, of growing and cooking is interesting because, you know, I've been thinking about the situation that we're all in together in many different parts of the world right now. And I think about it as a crucible, as a place where ingredients are being churned, you know, in and things are coming out. And it strikes me that both of you have created new work in this crucible, in this time. And, you know, it would be really interesting, I think, for everyone who's on this call to hear what your thoughts are about where that comes from, that cooking, and you know, like how during a time when many of us are struggling for that ritual in our lives, because writing is a ritual as well. I'd be really interested in hearing what you might have to say about yourselves and to one another. So Afua, if you don't mind, if we could.
Thank you, Amir. I think, you know, we're all, in most places or in many places, people are in lockdown. Certainly within North America and Western Europe. And you know, being in lockdown comes with all kinds of things. It's really not safe for some people in lockdown. We know many people in lockdown face abuse. We know children face abuse from parents. We know the violence against women has increased. But here we are. And then some people can't even be in lockdown, like essential workers and nurses and doctors. They have to go out. Part of the reason why we have this spike in the COVID uptake is because of people who are working on the front line, and the powers that be, the politicians, are not providing sick time and sick pay and so on. So it's really a chaotic thing for many people. Some of us are privileged that we can be in lockdown and we have ample room in terms of physical space, and we can write and we don't have to go out and take the bus or go in the subway. So I just look at it from the multiple spaces of where people are. And you know, I'm privileged. I'm a professor. We were all sent home. We can teach from home. I've been teaching from home. But there's a great wounding in the earth. And also there's a lot of confusion because politicians lie and they play politics with people's lives. And truth, you know, you opened, Amir, earlier about truth. Truth is not really forthcoming. One day we are told this, the next day we are told that. So there's a lot of confusion. So no wonder people are coming up with their own theories about COVID-19, because politicians have been lying to us from the beginning. No wonder people feel many people feel scared about taking the vaccine, because there's so much confusion. So I think it's important. One advice I would say to people is to go deep inside. And if you can create community with other people, those in your household, if you're able to, those in virtual space, if you're able to, if you have, nowadays people talk about the bandwidth. Not everyone has digital literacy. That's the other thing. But if you're able to, it's important to create community. It's important to gather people around you, whether they're of like minds or not. I think perhaps more importantly is to go into that place of silence if one is able to, right? So it's important to drop down and maybe not necessarily dig deep, because maybe we don't want to dig at this moment, but just to drop down in that space in the heart space, in spirit with the breath. Deep breathing is I tell people, breathe. That's the most important thing, right? Just sit and breathe. Once you start breathe and you develop a rhythm, the stress will leave your body, or at least some of it will leave your body. And then our brains will clear, and then you can think clearly. I have a cousin who is an essential worker. She works in a senior citizens home. They have lost a lot, many. It's her home is one of the home you hear about in the news. They have lost a lot of the residents in that home to COVID. And she calls me, and she gets home, she calls me, we talk on the phone for hours. And and she, I provide that space for her where she can just talk, because she's going out there, she's battling all kind of elements, and I am inside my house. And that's, I feel, is a little bit of myself that I can give to her. So it's but at the same time, people have agency, and we have to seize that agency. And we have to realize that we are also citizens, whichever way you want to interpret that. So we do have a right to call on the politicians. We do have a right to exercise that civic duty, as opposed to becoming hopeless, as opposed to becoming paralyzed by fear. I see now where a lot of critical thinking is gone through the window. And if you question something, people say, oh, it's as if we should, we should just shut our minds down. So it's, yeah, that's all I would have to say on that point. Developing a practice is important, but I also realize where people are, that in the multiplicity, in the millions, in the billions of people on the planet, right? It's sometimes that might not be so easy, right?
Can I jump in there as well to also echo, Afua, what you are saying? I'm also in a place of privilege, like Afua, where I can work from home. I'm a full-time artist, and I'm working on different contracts. And so it is quite a privilege to be able to work from home, to find a way to focus, and to do this work, and not have to be out on the front lines. But also, if we have this privilege, then how, again, can we share with others? How can we, so that our giving and taking is equal? Because if we do have this privilege where, yes, we have enough space at home, we have a safe space, there's food in the fridge, there's some money in the bank, perhaps we've got a beloved beside us as well, then that's something that is so, we can give thanks for it, but we also have to find different ways to share. And I really echo what Afua says, which is creating community, or continuing to connect with the folks that the communities that you were connected to before, and finding ways to do that online. And if you're not able to do that, then practices. And what are those practices, those rituals? They don't always have to be religious or spiritual, though they can lead to a kind of spirituality and a contemplation. For example, I have a friend who has a jogging practice, and that's been a useful tool for him. He's in lockdown, but he's able to go running a little bit. So it's a touchstone, something that helps him to kind of a meditation for him. That's his practice. That's really useful for him, and that has kept him going. It could be a yoga practice that folks can do at home. It could be even a cooking practice. There's lots of different practices that are available to us, lots of different resources available to us. If we do some searching on the online world, so that we can do some searching in the inner world, which is also in the end what Afua is saying, which is do some kind of contemplative practice, which is go inside. And maybe you don't want to go too deep, but it's okay to take some moments to do that, and to just breathe through all of these really heavy experiences that everyone in the world is going through, either themselves personally, physically, family and friends around them, because we're losing family and friends around us. And that's a very difficult thing to process, how we're going through grief, through loss. How do we transform grief and loss and anger, because those are very powerful emotions. And if we sit in them, if we sit in grief, then we fall into depression. If we sit in anger, it can lead to violence. So those are very powerful emotions. They shouldn't be suppressed, but they should be transformed. And different rituals, different practices can help us to transform those emotions, including also just friendships, the folks that we interact with, speaking with people and listening with people.
I can relate to what you're both saying very closely. I know from an institutional perspective at the museum, and I know Leticia would agree, is we've moved to maintain relationships with our audiences and our communities through online programming. That's one way we've remained in touch. And as a museum and the Alliance as well as a cultural institution, we look to the arts, we look to what artists are doing in this time. And I think we're all searching your message, both yours and Afua's message, right? That what I've just heard you say is that you have to look after yourself. You have to nurture that so that you're healthy enough to help others. Afua, your story about creating space for an individual who needs that support, I think is quite beautiful. And we can all kind of find ways to make that small difference. But you also have bigger roles. Both of you created public work during this time. And as artists, you had something to say. And I believe, Afua, you as a historian, Tawhida, after reading your novel, the honesty in it is palpable. It seems that you are both seekers of truth. And when I'm looking to artists in this time, when I'm looking to poets, I'm looking for a way to find the truth. And I know, Afua, you spoke about, like, who do we trust? Like, where do we go? And I think what I've heard both of you say is that has to be compounded with an inner journey based on our own relationships. Now, one thing that you also both have in common, besides the fact that you've made this work at this time, and I believe you've made it because you want to do exactly what you've said. You want to heal in some way, provide some truth, provide an anchor point, I believe. What do you have anything to say about that? Am I just reaching? Afua, am I reaching?
No, you're not just reaching. Or you can reach. You can continue reaching. You will get the fruit or whatever the metaphor is. No, it's great. I've always been a seeker as a kid, even as a little child. I remember being about 7 years old in Jamaica and going to church, and just they have a practice in the church where my mother went, and my mother took us. My father didn't go to church. He was really critical of religion. He was an agnostic, he said, but he sent us. But I remember they have this practice called altar call. An altar call is when the pastor or the preacher calls the faithful to the altar, and you just kind of pray and I don't know, ask God for blessings. But I remember being 7 and was the only kid who answered that call, went up to the altar call and was just praying so fervently. Don't ask me what I was praying about. I don't remember. But I just remember that. And the pastor was so impressed that this little child came up to the altar call. So I think that was my first consciousness of attempting to tap into this higher source. So here I am, many years later, Muslim, and engaged in the 5 pillars of Islam, but we don't know about the 5 because we don't know if anyone can make Hajj, because now you have to be vaccinated to enter the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So since last year and this year, Hajj is going to be scaled down, but the other 4 practices, right? The Shahada, which is, taking that profession of faith, the fasting, which we're doing now, the prayer, the 5 daily ritual prayer, And I also augment those practices with others, right? So like with the recitation of God's name, the 99 names, not all 99 names at every sitting, but you choose a few and recite them, especially in the early mornings. It's a very good practice. So people who are fasting now, you begin the fast around 4:30 in the morning. So just before that, you do your prayers and the recitation and the meditation and the contemplation. I find that to be very, very powerful. Like when I was writing my PhD dissertation and had 3 kids, two of whom were little, were babies. That was how I did my PhD. I'd get up like 4 o'clock every morning, did my practice, and turn on the computer and start working. And then by 8, got the kids up, send them off to daycare, so on. But, doing that over and over every single day and at different points during the day really anchored me, really grounded me, really built resilience. Talk about building resilience, and really connected me to, that higher source, if you want to call it that, to that divinity, to that strength, to that grace. I always prayed for grace, always prayed for grace, sometimes not even fully understanding what grace meant. But those are some of the practices that kept me, we're going to the inner, but also they have to be externalized in your external world, right? And that also as an activist, I'm an artist, I'm a scholar, but I'm an activist. And then I look at the tradition of people who, had a spiritual practice, whether it was Malcolm X or Mary McLeod Bethune or Martin Luther King, who were so deeply, deeply connected to spirit, but who was still out there in the world and helping to transform the world.
Thank you.
Can I jump in there as well
Absolutely. Yeah.
to echo a little bit, but also, it's wonderful to hear people's story at how they arrive at a spiritual practice or a religious practice. And as you told that story, Afua, I thought about how I also arrived at a spiritual practice, or how it arrived to me, or at me, or around me, and then inside me. And I think artists are always seeking, and we generally, especially if you're a writer, you begin by seeking in books. You may seek in people as well, but I was definitely looking for grace, for God, for this concept of the divine in books. And I'd read about things, whether I was reading about things and perhaps trying yoga or trying Buddhist meditation practices, things like that. And I always found a great beauty in them and a great benefit to them. But there was always something missing, and I never knew what it was until I was, my beloved at the time, this is 20 years ago, brought me to a Sufi gathering in Vancouver. And I never left that gathering. I never left that room. And I'm still in that room here now, and that room is in me. And that's where I met a teacher. And a guide can always be very useful in helping to anchor our practices as well, or at least to spark them. And so when I met this Sufi teacher, who happens to be a Turkish, and would speak in Turkish and have a translator who would translate into English. And he would give sohbet, or spiritual discourse, and we would have moments of music. And so, like many folks, many musicians that we know who started singing in church, I started singing with the Sufis, and the poems I was writing became songs. And I didn't know that I could also be a musician until the Sufis allowed it. And you didn't have to sing exactly this way or that way. All you had to do was let your inspiration take you, and it was always accepted. If there was a moment where you screamed, it was accepted. And I found that those practices that involve discourse on all sorts of elements of living, whether it's also from Quran or dreams, it was all sorts of different kinds of tales that were shared and questions asked and responded. And the music, and also the zikr, or the zikrullah, right? The zikr of Allah, which is the recitation that we do as a group in Sufi orders, and they're always, every order has their own way. Some orders, their recitation is silent, and they sit together and they do a zikir, which is repeating or chanting names of Allah or different phrases in silence. Others do the whirling zikir, right? The whirling meditation. Others do the howling meditation. I'm in the group that are howlers, which is really wonderful because it opens something up that was already there in me. I couldn't find the key. So meeting this gathering of dervishes opened something in me that was very clear, and I felt at home immediately. But how did this happen? I mean, I'm a woman of Antiguan descent. My dad is Antiguan from the Caribbean. My mom is Quebecoise. There's no connections at all in our family to Sufism, to Islam. No connections at all. We used to go to church occasionally, but not too often. My dad now became Buddhist, so we have excellent conversations. But how did all of this come about? And I think it's very interesting as we continue on our paths, all of us, is to look for that key that will open something in you that allows for contemplation, inner contemplation, that also then can be manifested in the work we do in the world. So this is where I wanted to mention a term that Afua brought up the other day, which is spiritual activism. And we were talking about what that means and how our faith and our practices are directly linked and encourage and drive our work in the world as artists or as activists, as novelists, as poets, performers, organizers, as facilitators, teachers, all those things. And so our faith and our practices is a real driving force. And I can only wish that for everyone to find some kind of practice that is a key that unlocks something in you so that your everything you do is to its fullest potential. This is my wish for the world.
This idea of spiritual activism, I mean, it returns me back to why I do what I do, which is trying to find the work of artists that I believe will help people, will provide some healing perhaps when they need it. Like, what do people need? What do audiences want? That's a question. If you're doing what I do, you ask yourself, what do people need right now? And poetry, when I think of that practice, again, and for me, it involves dance, theater, music, like poetry. That's all poetry for me, right? It all kind of becomes one. But this idea that you've raised, both of you, you mentioned zikir, and that, or the idea of remembering, that act of remembering. And as a historian, Afua, you remind us, you tell us stories that we have forgotten, neglected, weren't told, have not been told yet. This becomes nourishment, back to the original metaphor of food, right? It becomes nourishment because I think it's difficult to search. It's difficult to make poetry, to have that response yourself, make art, unless you've been inspired, unless you've experienced it. I mean, I wanted to play music the first time I heard live, amazing music. Like, it's like, I want to do that. That's the thing that it takes. So I want to go back to you, both of you as artists, and, as spiritual activists through your art, this idea of truth, but remembering. I think that's something I've just heard you both speak about a couple of times each. Afua, do you have any ideas, any response?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's also it is this matter of integrity. You said that there are lots of needs in the world. We all have needs, and you're absolutely right. We all have needs, but each one of us can't fulfill a need. And what is the work that we do to fulfill a need? What is the work? So each one has their own purpose. And so I think for me, one of that, and for Tanya, is art, is poetry, is history. Because we're all brought on the planet to do something unique, something specific. Even if we are stay-at-home moms or dads, that's something unique, very specific, like cooking for people and looking after them and breastfeeding them. That's just so fantastic. So each of us have this purpose. I want to read another poem that brings all of that, I think, together. The remembering, the art, and the activism. This poem is called Fugitive. And it's subtitled Elizabeth Russell Speaks of Her Slave, Peggy Pompadour. Elizabeth Russell and her brother Peter Russell owned a slave family in Toronto. So it's the beginning of the 19th century. Peggy Pompadour and her children, who are Jupiter, Amy, and Millie. And Peggy has a husband who is free. He's not enslaved. His name is Pompadour. So Elizabeth Russell would write in her diary about Peggy and how she want to get rid of Peggy and so on and so forth. So it's a Toronto poem. Peggy is in the habit of running away. It would be bad enough if she left by herself, but now she's taking her children with her. She is a very bad woman, a mean slave. She goes to the outskirts of the city and roams the bushes, eating berries and wading in the Don River, catching trout that still travel to these parts. She has erected a hut of sorts from the brambles of the elderberry tree. She lived there with her daughters, Amy and Millie, for 3 weeks until Peter sent the constables to retrieve her. He returned the children to the house but lodged Peggy in jail. No, he wants to sell her, but neither Joseph Brandt nor Matthew Elliott want to buy her on account of her fugitive career, though they promised Peter they would. Because no one wants to buy her, Peter has to keep her in jail. He resents paying the jailer's fee. If only this mean slave would behave. Her so-called husband, Pompey, visits her each day, bringing her food, a blanket, and ginger tea. He tells me that even though it is summer, it is still cold in jail. Once Pompey even snatched the children from the house to visit Peggy. Pompey is a free man, otherwise we would jail him too. Peggy's incorrigible son, Jupiter, has followed in her fugitive steps. He has just run off. Someone saw him in the vicinity of the Don River, around Patra Road, lurking about Mr. Long's farm. Peter has sent the constables after him. Peter really wishes to be rid of Peggy. I, for one, do not want her ever in this house again. I hate the very sight of her. After she smashed the fine china I crossed the sea with from Ireland. Because the jailer's fee is mounting, Peter is forced to put an ad in the paper. The ad reads, "To be sold, a Black woman named Peggy, aged about 40 years, and a Black boy, her son, named Jupiter, about 15 years, both of them the property of the subscriber. The woman is a tolerable cook and washerwoman and perfectly understands making soap and candles. The boy is tall and strong for his age and has been employed in the country business, but brought up principally as a house servant. They are each of them servants for life. Matthew Elliott has disappointed us, Joseph Brandt the same. Perhaps someone will take pity on Peter and take the wretch and her son off his hand. I have already given away her daughter, Millie and Amy, to my goddaughter, Elizabeth Dennison." So that was the voice of Elizabeth Russell. talking about the Black woman, Peggy Pompadour.
Well,
And the ad I read from is actually a real ad that appeared in the York Gazette, February 10th, 1806. The York Gazette, York is the old name for Toronto, the colonial name.
and anyone
So
who lives,
that ad is in that newspaper. Go ahead, Amir.
well, that makes it so, real. I mean, I live in Toronto, and so we all know the Don Valley and Pottery Road, and I can picture these places as you describe. So thank you again. These stories that not all of us may be familiar with are really important in terms of this truth seeking that we're all about. Tawhida, if you have a response to that, that would be great. And then I would like to invite Leticia back because I think we have some questions and things, and I want to make sure we don't run out of time for that.
Well, one thing I would say is that we are very lucky to have art during COVID, and I think art is saving many people. Perhaps if you are unable to, you find you can't focus to read, then you're watching movies or you're watching television shows, and or you're listening to music. Music is such wonderful medicine, and hopefully these things will inspire you to perhaps try some of them yourself. We have the technology to make movies on our computers ourselves, and we have places where we can share them online with each other. This is wonderful medicine. Everyone is an artist, and in all indigenous cultures, in the community, now we call it community arts, but everyone was part of those rituals around. For example, if there was a drought and you were going to have some kind of ritual that involved music and dance and song, in the community, everyone would come together and participate. And perhaps if you didn't feel comfortable singing or drumming or dancing, perhaps you were the one making the tea or cooking the food, preparing the food for everyone. And so all of these rituals that they always brought us together, and they're now also bringing us together even though we're all apart in our little Zoom Kaabas. So I just want to also give thanks for all of the arts that we have access to through the internet, through our own kind of home libraries, or through places where we can access the arts and perhaps attempt to remember that we are all artists ourselves, and that we can go and try different things and share them and see what happens, and anything is possible. And so I will read a very short poem, not by me, but by Afua, called Copper Woman, because I read it the other day and it made me cry, and it has to do with giving thanks, and it's called For Noor. And Noor is an Arabic word meaning a kind of divine light, the light of Allah, the light of God. I pray for the spirits of the ancestors, known and unknown, for those who died when their homes were burnt and destroyed, for those who were captured in slave raids, for those who died on the march to the coasts, for those who died in the slave castles, for those who died while crossing the sea, perishing at the bottom, for those who died upon arriving, from diseases, the lash of whip, malnutrition, and of broken hearts, for those who died fighting for freedom, carrying the flame of revolt in their hands, and those like Nanny, Harriet, Toussaint, and Amina rose up, triumphant, the spirits of the old one, ever watchful, guiding. I pray for the spirits of the ancestors, known and unknown. Thank you, Afua.
Thank you, Tawhida. That was a complete surprise. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Honor is mine, my love.
Thank you. Thank you both for speaking truth. Leticia, are there any questions or anything that you would like to share with us that's come up from the chat?
Yes, thank you so much, Tawhida and Afua. Yeah, so we don't have any questions. So if you have some questions, please don't hesitate to ask them in the chat. But I just want to read some comments that we have. and I think some of them are really beautiful. So we have Jamila who said, thank you, Afua and Tawhida. This is so true that this pandemic has made us to be present and become more sensitive and empathetic towards each other. To me, this time seems to be helping us practice humanity in our own individual yet meaningful and deeper way. So I don't know if you want to comment on the comment that we have, but feel free to do so. And we also have a comment from Christine. I work in a health clinic and we have a lot of elderly patients and that come in on a regular basis. It both warms and breaks my heart hearing that they treat their appointments as their hour of socialization, while of course receiving attentive care. But they often speak about feeling lonely, lacking cognitive and emotional stimulation. There are a few patients that miss having access to libraries and library books, community classes, and the being able to safely practice their religions. It reminds me how essential art and expression are to us in our daily lives. So it was religious beliefs, yeah. And we also have a beautiful comment from Justin as well. The artist's words, and especially spirituality charged words, such as food, can be the path to the truth. Fine artists aspire for their words or images to be the truth that draw us or return us to the source of our spirituality. So, yeah, so that's a beautiful comment. So I don't know if Afua or Tawhida, you want to comment on some of the comments that we had?
Yeah, they're all very nice. Thanks to everyone. Someone asked a question about the slave prison. I guess it's from the poem I read about Peggy being put in jail. It was a common practice to put enslaved people in jail or some kind of confined space by their owners if they ran away or if they misbehave or, you know. So Peggy was put in jail in Toronto because she kept running away, and then the police officers would retrieve her. And if you know Toronto, the jail used to be just behind where St. Michael's Hospital is. So there's Queen East, and there's Victoria Street, and that little street at the back. There used to be a passport office there, but anyway, that's where the city jail was during that time. So it was a common practice. It wasn't anything unusual, but it just shows the kind of brutality and trauma that Black people experienced in this country and how it went down to generation, because we now know that her son was also jailed. He used to run away and he was captured. And, you know, we have the experience today or the situation today where, you know, you have this mass incarceration of Black people, especially Black men in prisons in Canada and elsewhere, but we can stick to Canada. In the federal prisons, the incarceration of Black bodies has increased by over 50% in the past 10 years, and Black people only make up like 1.3% or maybe 2% of the Canadian population. So it's, and this is where I think it's important to have spiritual activism, because as Tawhida started at the top of the hour about, you know, having the anger and the grief and the resentment, we are angry, we are resented, we are resentful, you know, as a Black woman in this country, at the atrocities that have been committed against Black people. But moving that into someone, I can't remember whom, talked about righteous anger, you know, moving that into righteous anger. Because, you know, we oftentimes we look at the various spiritual leaders and the prophets, and, you know, we kind of build a narrative around them that they were all peaceful and they just turned the other cheek and so on and so forth. That's not necessarily true. They were for justice. all of them, for justice. And so that propels us, or that idea of it propels us. It's part of our struggle in this world to transform these issues.
Can I continue this thought, Afua, which is that as we work towards a Black liberation, also liberation of Indigenous people, brown folks, marginalized people, it's not only marginalized people that require liberation, all people require that liberation. And it starts in the heart. And that's where, as artists, we can hit. So it doesn't matter what you look like. If we can speak to you human to human, then perhaps a change can come about so that as a species, we are moving forward together. Because it doesn't only work if part of the species is continuously, systematically enslaved or kept down and oppressed, and the other one isn't. Both have to kind of start to remember what it is to be a human being together, all of us on this planet, and that we're all here to be of service to each other. If we weren't, then I would have my own planet and I wouldn't have to do taxes, or I wouldn't even have to speak a language. You know, I could speak in intonations with all the animals and plants. But we're all here together to be of service to each
Absolutely.
other. You know, and my Sufi teacher says something so beautiful that I always keep in my pocket, which is, if you want to serve God, serve human beings. That's the way. And
Absolutely.
so that is when I think of spiritual activism, or what drives the work we're doing, it's to serve human beings so that all together we're moving forward. But as we serve human beings, we need to see very clearly how human beings throughout history have treated each other and why that has happened, and how we can work to change that. Because there's a lot of work to do, and it starts inside, it starts in the heart and in the mind. And how can we continuously speak from the heart, not from our our pocket that wants money to be put in it, or our greed that wants more and more to take more and more, when in fact we don't need it. So there's lots of work to do, and it's so amazing to be an artist and to try to help folks remember what it is to be the most beautiful human being that one can be.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, everybody, tout le monde, and thank you, Tawhida, Afua especially, Leticia. I hand it back to you. I really enjoyed hearing everyone speak and to be part of the conversation, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup à tout le monde. Merci aussi pour vos commentaires. Thank you so much for your beautiful comments and for your attention. Thank you so much, Tawhida and Afua. So I just would like to remind you that if you enjoyed this conversation, so we are going to publish this video on the YouTube channel of Aga Khan Museum, and you will be able to see it again. And feel free to share it with your friends. It was a very inspiring conversation with both of you and Amir as well. So thank you so much. Je vais finir aussi en français. Merci beaucoup au public de l'Alliance française pour une conversation en anglais qu'on a traduite en français grâce à Violaine. Et je vous remercie vraiment d'avoir été avec nous. Et j'aime aussi l'idée de faire briller le bilinguisme canadien, parce que le bilinguisme, c'est l'anglais et le français. Et évidemment, toutes les autres langues qui sont aussi les langues du Canada. Donc, on a énormément de diversité ici. Et je suis vraiment ravie d'avoir participé à cette conversation. So, thank you so much. I don't know if maybe Afua and Tawhida, you want to have the last words.
The last word. Yeah. Critical hope, radical love, critical mass. Throughout all the ages, we've pulled through. It takes a few people. What do they say? 2.5% of the population makes up the critical mass. Only 2.5%. Zakat is only 2.5%, by the way. So I find that interesting too. And throughout history, we've had these coalitions, we've had different peoples coming together to advance humanity and for our evolution, our spiritual evolution. So I'm hopeful. Critical hope, radical love.
I echo that, and I would say great gratitude, ongoing, nonstop gratitude for what we have all around us that we never pay attention to. If you take a moment and look around you and say, wow, I've got more than I need, hold on to that. If you do have that, that's a wonderful thing to remember. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tawhida. Thank you, guys. This was brilliant. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Ali, for your dig-in and your questions. Wonderful. And Letitia, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your beautiful words. Merci pour vos très beaux mots et prenez soin de vous. Merci à tous et bonne journée.
Merci. Merci tout le monde.